So, hello everyone. My name is Corley Pretorius and I'm Deputy Director of UNEP-WCMC. Welcome to this webinar we're hosting today. This is the second one, in fact, that we are hosting on the scoping of a global knowledge support service for biodiversity. The purpose of the webinar is really to provide information and update a little bit of what has happened since COP15 in December last year. And it's also to provide an opportunity for your inputs, for your feedback and for your views on a global knowledge support service for biodiversity. What we're going to do in the webinar today is to give a little bit of a short presentation on our current thinking, and then there will be time for a question and answer session or for your comments. We have a lot of time and we'll do that in the program, and then we will also do a short presentation on a co-design workshop that we are planning for April. But before we go and start the program, a couple of housekeeping announcements. So just to notify you that this webinar, like the first one today, will be recorded and it will be made available on YouTube. We are using a Zoom webinar setting, so your microphone and will be muted and your camera off. But if you raise your hand, we will give you an opportunity to speak. We will unmute those things and give you an opportunity to speak. We would like you to use the Q&A session, please, and you don't need to post a question specifically, but please post comments and questions in the Q&A function of Zoom. And then the last announcement is that we have fantastic technical support in Laura Mack, who is on standby. So if you have a problem, please write her a chat message directly. So let's start with the program. First of all, we were going to welcome the CBD Secretariat to say something, and I just want to check whether they have joined. No, it seems they haven't joined yet. I understand there might be a little bit of a technical problem. They will shortly join us. So let's start with the presentation and an overview of the consultation to date on the Global Knowledge Support Service. So if we can move to the next slide, please. In this presentation, just a quick overview of where we're at, and then the proposals that is also captured in the discussion paper on the options for enhanced cooperation. And we will give a little bit of detail around the consultation process as well. So if we can move to the next slide, please. In our discussions and our engagement to date, and throughout COP15, in fact, parties have expressed the need for capacity building, technical and scientific cooperation. UNEP-WCMC, in cooperation with the CBD Secretariat and other partners, is facilitating sort of this process to understand what could this kind of support service for capacity building and technical cooperation look like, especially support service around biodiversity knowledge and data. In the next slide, please. We are, of course, also mindful of the package of decisions, the Kunming-Montreal decisions, not only the Global Biodiversity Framework, but also with reference to Decision 15/8, where the parties decided and agreed on a number of mechanisms and centers and processes around capacity building. We hope that the consultation process that we are running for the Global Knowledge Support Service would also provide useful information and input to the processes that would be forthcoming from COP15. In the next slide, please. In our discussions to date, so we have consulted bilaterally with parties, but we've also had a number of side events and so forth in the COP, and the needs expressed so far is really to enhance the uptake for biodiversity data across all sectors of society. We realize that there's an enormous task to be done in terms of implementing the Global Biodiversity Framework, and it's a whole of society, whole of government approach. And the focus is really on developing and supporting capacity to make data available and accessible to all stakeholders. Another need that was expressed was around facilitated access to biodiversity and tools. We have a great range of tools available already, but really to connect looking at options, how can we connect these tools and how can we facilitate data flow between and among the tools. It is clear from our discussions also that there is a need and great opportunities, in fact, for digital transformation, standardization of data and infrastructure around biodiversity data, and really to enhance interoperability among tools, among data providers and users, to look at a systems approach on how we can work together, enhance cooperation around data, knowledge, technical guidance, and so forth. And then the final point is really to look at the national level. And this is a big focus of the way that we are thinking about the global knowledge service, is to explore collaborative approaches, among nations, peer-to-peer approaches, but better coordination also between national, regional, and global providers of data, curators of tools and other resources to look at how can we create a system to bring these together and make these available. Next slide, please. In the discussion paper that's available on the website and that we released in December during the COP, we proposed 3 sort of clusters of work for enhanced cooperation around biodiversity and knowledge and tools. The first, and really the foundational aspect, is support to national biodiversity institutions. And I'll go through some of these in a moment. This is just the overview slide. The second is around accelerating digital transformation and interoperability of data and tools. And the third is really to drive that collaboration at regional and global levels in support of national biodiversity institutions and users. Next slide, please. In the first option, investing in national biodiversity institutions, we are taking sort of a biodiversity data value chain approach, really looking at what are the barriers for and what are the needs or opportunities, if we put it in a positive way, from data collection to where it's published, and really supporting the uptake, the use of biodiversity and knowledge and data for national planning processes, for the private sector, a really important stakeholder in this process, right through to monitoring and reporting progress. And the next slide, please. The second cluster of work or bundle of work that we are proposing is to look at interoperability and data sharing. This is really underpinned by a sort of a digital transformation approach and understanding what are the key elements or building blocks to make data flow, to make it speak to each other, to enable users to access data in a seamless way through whether it's web services, sharing infrastructure or replicating infrastructure, technology transfer. These are all part of the bundle of advancing on interoperability, sort of a technological, if you like, a technological bundle, but it's not really limited to the tech only, because what would enable this data interoperability is also a look at data sharing practices and policies. Next slide, please. And then the final component is really making best use of all the assets, if you like, in the institutional landscape. We are aware that there are many, many strong institutions at the regional level and also at the global level that can benefit, and we all create mutual benefit from being connected and integrated, collaborating in a system. So that would be one of another part of the work that we will be exploring. A second point under the collaboration at regional and global levels is also to look at aligning data approaches. And here we're thinking specifically to the investments already made, for example, in the data for the Sustainable Development Goal indicators. But there are also other approaches, for example, national ecosystem accounts, spatial accounts, where a lot of investment is being done in not only developing the systems, but also in capacity development, and looking at how can we learn from those existing initiatives. And then the third component is really bringing together the resources and the investments around learning and training services. Again, many assets out there, but can we create a choreography to bring these resources and make them available to a wider group or connected group of users? Next slide, please. It is a very busy landscape, and we're very aware of it. There are many, many different actors. And this is just one attempt to put it in a graphic to show how many connections and interlinkages we are seeing. There are fantastic tools already being used, such as DART, and how can we support the further uptake and effectiveness of tools such as DART by making data available, by providing training, by connecting different actors in the landscape, if you like, the institutional landscape, to all work together and invest in the same direction, invest in the kinds of systems that will really boost the implementation of the Global Biodiversity Framework. And then the final slide on the consultation, just to let you know that the consultation phase and the scoping phase for the knowledge service continues. We've done a number of steps already, but we would like to continue with this consultation, and today, the second webinar. It's not evening for everyone. This second webinar is really also an additional point in that consultation process to get your feedback. We are looking at collaborating with others that will also be doing surveys and questionnaires to parties to make sure that we connect to those. And then we will be hosting a co-design workshop in April in Cambridge, and Natasha will present on that a little bit later, and provide the outcome of that co-design workshop circulated widely for review and for your feedback. So I'll stop there with this short overview, and I think that the CBD Secretariat has joined, and Gillian, thank you very much for joining. And I see Eri is also online. Thank you very much, Eri, for joining.
Yeah. Thank
Gillian,
you.
over to you. Oh, hello, Eri.
Yeah. Thank you very much, and good evening or good morning, wherever you are. I'm going to be speaking on behalf of the Acting Executive Secretary, David Cooper, who is unable to join this because he has another meeting going on right now. And I would like to thank UNEP-WCMC and all the collaborating partners for organizing this webinar to introduce the scope of the study for the Global Knowledge Support Service for Biodiversity. As I believe we all agree, the adoption of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework was a momentous achievement, and we are all proud of that. However, its significance is still yet to come and is entirely dependent on how quickly and how effectively it will be implemented. Countries must now embark on the process of revising and aligning their NBSAPs with the Global Biodiversity Framework, including setting new national targets and defining concrete actions to contribute to the achievement of its goals and targets. This, of course, will require transparent and timely access to relevant data, information, and knowledge. And quick access and quick and easy access to this information will also be key in monitoring the progress of implementation of the framework. As I am sure you are all aware, a monitoring framework for the GBF containing a series of indicators was adopted by COP15, and an ad hoc technical expert group was established to fill the gaps in this indicator framework so that it can be completed at COP16 in 2024 in Turkey. However, the indicators are only as good as the data and information behind them. So we need to be able to find good data. And as you know, the adage of, as they were saying, garbage in, garbage out. So if we don't have good data, even the results of our monitoring will not be as good as we want. Lack of reliable biodiversity data and information has been noted in many previous national reports, as well as the regional and global assessments as being an important obstacle to meaningful action on biodiversity. We need to rectify this as soon as possible. And target 21 of the Kunming Biodiversity Framework, Kunming-Montreal Biodiversity Framework, aims to do this, and target 121 states that we need to ensure that the best available data, information, and knowledge are accessible to decision makers, practitioners, and the public to be able to guide effective and equitable governance, integrated and participatory management of biodiversity, and to strengthen communication, awareness, education, monitoring, research, and knowledge management. And also in this context, to ensure that traditional knowledge, innovations, practices, and technologies of indigenous peoples and local communities only accessed with their free, prior, and informed consent in accordance with national legislation. The Global Knowledge Support Service for Biodiversity is expected to contribute to the implementation of this particular target, and also the GBF in general and its monitoring framework. In addition to this new support service, will need to be complemented with other ongoing initiatives, such as the Knowledge Management for Biodiversity Initiative, which is being led by the CBD Secretariat, but also other initiatives like the NBSAP Accelerator Partnership that is being launched to support parties to implement the post-2020 framework through NBSAPs. The support service is expected to provide, on a needs-driven basis, key support services, including assisting countries in gaining access to crucial data and information when revising the NBSAPs, as well as monitoring and reporting on the progress and achievements being made. This support service will also help in ensuring that information and knowledge are properly categorized for ease of discovery, for example, by goal or by target or by indicators. Furthermore, the support service will help to link parties with relevant data and knowledge providers, and with a view to helping implementation at all levels. And finally, by strengthening the communities of practice and knowledge networks, the service will enable parties and knowledge providers to share knowledge, expertise, good practices, and lessons learned. However, to be effective, this knowledge service must be developed in a way that truly meets the needs of parties. As such, the ongoing phase of the Global Knowledge Support Service is crucial. It will enable parties to identify their knowledge needs and gaps. This phase will also enable parties to define their priorities and also identify ways to provide support in addressing those needs. To ensure, also to ensure its effectiveness and long-term sustainability, appropriate governance structures and financing mechanisms for the support service need to be carefully considered. And we are also pleased to know the growing number of parties that are joining this, process of co-creating this support service. And we are hopeful that through these webinars, we'll bring together all our knowledge and experiences and expertise in shaping the scope and the functionality of this support service. Once again, I would like to indicate that the CBD Secretariat is committed and fully on board in supporting this process all the way. And we look forward to realizing the vision of having this support service in place very soon. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Yuri, and thank you for that intervention. Thank you for the commitment to participate in the webinar twice today. So we really appreciate your time and the support from the CBD Secretariat side. I would now like to give the floor to Anne Teller, please, of the European Commission, for some considerations on the support service. Thank you, Anne.
Thank you, and yeah, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, I don't know, to those who are connected today. And so I'm Anne Teller from the European Commission, and for those who were in Montreal, you may remember that we organized together with UNEP-WCMC and the Secretariat of the CBD some events, some side events on the need for a global knowledge support service for biodiversity, because we were fully aware that whatever agreement would be reached at the end of COP15, there would be a substantial need for building capacity and strengthening the knowledge base for implementation and monitoring of this framework. And indeed, the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity framework and its monitoring framework are massive. It's a huge challenge ahead of us. And therefore, it's really time now to start co-designing all together this service to meet our needs. So, as Eri was saying, there is indeed Target 21 calling for knowledge and access to data, transparency, participatory processes, traditional knowledge being used, but there are also the decision on capacity building and on knowledge management, and this platform is really trying to meet all these needs. So in the name, which can be changed, that's for sure. To me, there are two important words: knowledge and service. Knowledge, because it's not only about data quality, data access, data transparency, it's also about the implementation of indicators that will be developed by ATEC through an expert process. It's also about tools like reporting tools like DART, as Corley said, and other tools for information management to facilitate our life. It's also about guidance on how to implement UNCEA, the environmental accounting system, especially for ecosystems, also for business, and providing trainings when some trainings would be needed for parties. The other important word is service, because it's really the idea that it should meet our needs. So it should not be top-down. I know that the word global may be misleading in that respect. So it's really a platform interconnecting existing initiatives. It's not to reinvent the wheel, that's for sure. It's really to tap in what exists already, but also to address the whole scope of the framework, and therefore to interconnect with other sectors and other MEAs. So the whole, the key word is really federating efforts and also long-term, because it's not a one-off initiative. We know it's a long journey that we will have to make. And the first step is this stop in Cambridge soon, to sit down together, to exchange and to design together a service which would really be meeting our need in a stepwise approach. So thank you very much, Corley, for giving me the time to say a few words tonight. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Anne. And I'm going to call on you and Eri to help field some of the questions and maybe continue the conversation. I'm also inviting Natasha Ali, who's with UNEP-WCMC, to join us. Thank you, Natasha. And maybe just to kick off in terms of, this is the opportunity for you to ask questions or to post your observations in the Q&A function of the webinar. I would also encourage you to raise your hand if you want to make an intervention. We would very much welcome that. So we have a question already on the financing, or a number on the financing, and indeed, so maybe just to step back and explain the process. What we're doing at the moment is doing the scoping for a knowledge service, as we have described. And in the scoping process, we will also look at financing options. So that is part of what we're investigating. Our sense so far is that, the same as I said in the earlier webinar, is that this is really an enormous task. So we don't see it as something that is going to be funded or can be funded only by, say, international development support funding, but we also look at a process, a longer term process where domestic financing would be available. And as was mentioned this morning also, engagement of the private sector is also incredibly important in and not only sort of contributing knowledge, but also in the uptake and the use of biodiversity related knowledge. So the financing plans are part of the scoping exercise. Suggestions are very welcome, and we would like to encourage you to provide those. Natasha, do you want to pick up on some of the other questions, or maybe say?
If I may, Corley, I just wanted to add, because we are one of the donors.
Yes, please. And sorry, and I should have acknowledged that. Yeah.
No, that's fine. That's fine. But since, I mean, I think the difference with previous initiatives is that we really want this to be a long-term journey, and therefore it's not an ad hoc project with ad hoc funding. So we are trying to kick it off, but we also hope there will be funding from multiple sources, you know, from public and private, and that will somehow be streamlined into this platform in order to build on what we have and really further develop this service, instead of having, you know, ad hoc initiatives as it has been in the past. I think this is an important point. And the other point, before I give the floor to Natasha, sorry, Natasha, for the link with IPBES assessment, that's a very good question. And what we saw, you know, the European Union is also a party of the CBD. And what we saw in Montreal is that some of the assessments which were adopted in July, sorry, at the last IPBES plenary, the time was too short for parties to really distill from there what could be really relevant to feed the negotiations. And in the future, that's something that we also have in mind, that the knowledge service could maybe do that and provide some briefings, neutral briefings, you know, not to take any position, but that parties could use to support their position in the negotiation. So it's not redundant. On the contrary, it's really to promote the use of this IPBES work into the CBD context. Thank you, Natasha.
Thanks, Anne. So I guess I could, just while we're waiting for questions to come through on the Q&A, or hands to be raised, I can't see any hands at the moment. I'll just reflect on some of the questions that we weren't able to respond to this morning. So one of the questions that we were asked was around how the Global Knowledge Support Service might integrate information from community-based monitoring systems or information systems, or citizen science, and different types of data that come from the sort of grassroots level and can be used at the national, regional and global level. So one of the, and I'm interested in what the rest of the panel think on this, but I think this is something that we really need to consider quite carefully. And I think it will be really important at the co-design workshop to have relevant community groups present and participating more in the process to design the Global Knowledge Support Service, to make sure that we have adequate permissions in place, that, you know, that the information is used in a most effective way to inform decision makers. But yeah, over to the others in the panel who may have views on this question, and I'll have a look through to see if there are others coming through. But please do add questions in the chat if you would like to raise anything at this point. Thank you.
Yeah. If I may add to what Natasha said, yeah, of course, information and knowledge is available at different levels, and the actions are also at different levels. And at the community level, at the real grassroots level, there's a lot of action that is going on, but there's also a lot of knowledge being generated on an ongoing basis. Good practices, the traditional knowledge that the communities have. And this is key to supporting decision-making in some ways. So we need to find a way of connecting to that and making sure that that knowledge and the information that is being generated finds its way into the mainstream to support conservation and to learn from the experiences of other communities, other practitioners, other stakeholders. So and this is what the knowledge support service is meant to facilitate. And it's not only for government entities, it's not only for the big NGOs, it's not on, but for everybody to be able to have a mechanism through which that knowledge can be accessed and shared, and making sure that we are able to support those that have those knowledge providers to be able to provide and share that knowledge. So I think it's critical. And citizen science, I think methodologies are being developed where this could be harnessed and aggregated and shared across globally, and learning right from the community level, right from your farm, right from your forest, and bring that knowledge upwards.
Thank you very much, Jerry. There's a question from Maria Zila on the governance, and what are our thoughts around the governance of such a knowledge service. So at the moment, the proposal, or the way the responses that we've received, is really pointing towards a federated system, so a multi-node or a distributed system, not a sort of a hub and spoke model, if you like, a centralized secretariat, but really looking at a number of organizations being part of such a network of support. Our thinking is also that it would be really important to engage some of the national biodiversity institutes in the governance, in sharing their experience, and also the recognizing the role that many of these institutes play, not only in their own countries, but often in the regions as well. So this is how our thinking is evolving around the governance, but we would be welcoming any other suggestions or additional suggestions or refinements of such a sort of a distributed or federated approach to providing the global knowledge service. There was another question that this morning that I wanted to raise also, because I see some of our colleagues are participating in this webinar, and this is around making sure that we also connect to the secretariats of the other MEAs, not only the CBD. So I would like to provide reassurances that this is definitely also on the cards and part of the scoping exercise that we are undertaking. Natasha, please. Yes.
Thanks, Cooley. Another question that was just raised offline is around how we're planning to harmonise the data and infrastructures, and somebody was pointing out the sort of issues related to that. So I wanted just to point out that this is one of the key areas of discussion for the co-design workshop. How will we look at the data that is included and information and knowledge, as the Secretariat's rightly pointing out, how that's governed within the space of the Global Knowledge Support Service needs a bit more consideration, and this is an area that we will be asking for much more input on from data custodians as we move forward.
Yes, thank you, Natasha, for raising that. Because that's an incredibly important part also of the sort of the interoperability or data flows, if you like, and here we would like to recognize the work of the GEO Secretariat in GEO1 and also GEPA, for example, in setting some of those data standards to make their systems work and to encourage the uptake there as well. And we would definitely be looking at those partner organizations to help us in this process of well, standardization sounds like a very sort of massive effort, but at least creating some alignment in data standards and in technical standards to enable greater cooperation. And it comes back to the point in funding also. I mean, you can really look at towards a system one day, hopefully, where when funding is made available to distributed institutions, that it all works towards similar standards and similar formats that would really enhance the interoperability and the cooperation among many different players in this landscape. There's a question on filling a gap in knowledge and skills.
Yeah.
Do you want to go ahead, Natasha or Eri?
Yes. Well, it's what I would say is the support service is not the one to fill the gap as such, but it can facilitate those players to be able to fill the gap. Because we need, as I think has been described before, the support service is not going to be an entity that is coming to solve the problems related, but rather to support those the entities that are working on this to address, whether it's a capacity need or whether a country is lacking access to crucial data, information, or knowledge, and they need that support to be able to access that. So I think we need to make a clarification here that the support service is not coming to like, it's not going to fill the gap as such, but rather to facilitate, to do the connections and enable the actors to act. So yeah.
Thank you, Eri. Natasha, yes.
I would just add to that, you know, part of the work we're doing as part of this scoping study is to look at the needs for parties, in particular to the CBD and other MEAs, and their data needs in relation to the different activities that they may undertake in relation to the decisions made at COP15. And as part of that needs assessment, we may well be identifying gaps. And that identification of the gaps is quite an important part of the Global Knowledge Support Service. Although, as Eri says, we can't answer all of the questions that the needs assessment might raise. It's an important part of this service is to think about those gaps and how they might be filled with other actors and to make those connections, as Eri is saying. I will just add as well, Eri, there's a question in the chat which from Maria Cecilia from Humboldt that might be directed to you. Thanks.
What's the question? Sorry, let me just. Yeah. So this is about the strengthening of capacities, right? Yeah. So, well, one of the envisioned, of course, support services strengthening capacity. So the idea is to make sure that government entities or community institutions they are strengthened and able to collect, codify, and be able to share that information or that knowledge with others. So depending on the need, because the support service is going to be a needs-driven service, depending on the need, if an institution or a country or says we need support in training in informatics, I'm just giving an example, the support service would be able to find who can provide this training in informatics among all the different partners, and facilitate that training for that country that is requesting for that type of support. And in other cases, it will be like, okay, they need to strengthen their institutional capacity to be able to manage the data they have. So their information systems need to be strengthened in order to be able to collect, curate, and communicate the information or the data they've collected. So if there's a need for that, the country or the institution would make the request, and then the support service would find how that need can be met. So all I will need to say is and confirm is that yes, this will be part of the service that this support service will provide to strengthen the capacities of national institutions to be able to collect and manage their data and information.
Yes, and on knowledge, the question on knowledge, I would say that all those who are really busy now in trying to implement the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework are struggling with, how to do it, because there is still a need for a lot of guidance on how to translate some concepts. I mean, we had the parties had started a glossary. I mean, should this glossary be kept alive in this service? It's not an official document, but at least it can help parties to have a clear definition of what we are talking about. Or, for instance, I was quoting target 2, how to assess whether an ecosystem is degraded or not. We need some guidance. We need some agreed methodologies or agreed definitions, so that we are not comparing apples and pears. So data are important, but it's not enough. It's also about knowledge, to be sure that we are implementing rightly and consistently what we adopted in Montreal. And if you think, for instance, of the input from science and INBES in particular, there were some very useful science briefings which were provided, but again, they were provided very late in the process. So for the negotiators, it was quite challenging to include that in their position. So such a service, again, could somehow facilitate the dissemination of these science briefings in relation to the implementation of some particular targets. So, I mean, this is as important, I would say, as data management. It's really knowledge management, and that's why there is a whole COP decision about it. And we will take this very seriously, as Eri said already.
Thank you, Anne. And just to reiterate what you've just said, in the conversations, this is exactly what we want to hear also from parties, is where do we strike the balance? What are the kinds of things that the knowledge service could usefully address? Also in terms of, what happens first? So sequencing of priorities is something that we're really interested to hearing more from you in terms of how does it work in your organization, in your context? What are the requirements? And that is part of the consultations that we are running at the moment. And we look forward to hear from you. We don't have at the moment the full scope or the full design. This is part of the process of really understanding the needs and understanding the priorities of key stakeholders.
Yeah, and I was also thinking, for instance, another example is about the wealth of very interesting INF papers which are provided before each substar or COP meetings, but often, parties don't have the time to go through them, and it's a pity in a way, because there are some very interesting elements to be taken into account in the negotiation and in implementation. And again, if the Global Support Service could not, of course, create new science or new knowledge, but just screen what exists and extract from there what would be really useful for parties to be aware of, I think that would already facilitate tremendously the work of the parties. So I'm just talking about my own experience, as you can hear.
Thank you, Anne.
Eri, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, I put up the hand to respond to one of the questions in the chat. I think that was from Maria. I hadn't seen it earlier, and this was about what would be the balance between data and knowledge, because they said how is the support service envisioning knowledge management. And it was saying, I see a lot of focus on data, but part of knowledge is. So just to reassure Maria that this is looking at a full scope, the whole spectrum from data to knowledge. but looking at knowledge more, actually, because that is what the decision makers and the implementers they deal with. They rarely do they go to the level of data, because that's for researchers. They distill it and transform it into information, and so you are between information and knowledge. This is where the decision makers come in. They will not analyze the actual primary data. They will work at the level of information and knowledge. So, and with knowledge, I mean, it can be defined at but that's really at a more distilled level. These things like best practices, lessons learned, the practical experiences, that's already at the level of knowledge. And this will be emphasized in this process, because when it comes to implementation, actually you learn more and you benefit more from what others have done at a practical level, and the best practices that have worked for them, and their positive experiences. And that's we will make sure that the knowledge support service enables decision makers, implementers, the public to access that kind of knowledge and be able to apply it and use it to achieve the targets, the goals and targets.
Thank you, Yuri. And there's another question in the chat in terms of understanding needs and priorities of parties, and how we have structured the scoping phase to really get that information, bring that information together. So we've had a number of sort of bilateral conversations. We've had the side event at the COP and many side conversations, if you like, during the COP 15. And then we are also planning a sort of a co-design workshop, which Natasha is going to speak about in a moment. And in addition, we would like to send out surveys or questionnaires to parties to really understand the needs. The reason, to be very honest, why we haven't done the surveys and the questionnaires yet is that we realize we're not the only people sending surveys and questionnaires to parties. So it takes a little bit of sort of background coordination and timing to try to minimize the sort of the disruption by having continuous questionnaires with questions that may sound similar, or are sort of not coordinated or choreographed a little bit. So that these are all sort of the strands that we are doing to harvest information and feedback. But we are also very open to more conversations, direct bilateral conversations. We have an email address available for any contributions that is really open to anyone that would like to add comments or views to this process. But maybe I'll hand over to Natasha to give us a little bit of an overview of the co-design workshop, so that you have a sense also of what we are planning there. Thank you, Natasha.
Oops, sorry. There was another question in the chat, and we can open up for further discussion after this section of the webinar. In this section, I'm going to outline, as Corley says, how we are planning to design the co-design workshop, which will discuss the scope and the process and all of the sort of ways of framing a global knowledge support service for biodiversity. And in this section, again, we're seeking feedback on the way that the workshop will be run. So please, again, put comments and questions into the Q&A function, or please write to us if you have any further reflections following this webinar. Next slide, please. So the co-design workshop is planned from the 18th to 21st of April in Cambridge at the UNEP-WCMC premises in the United Kingdom. And it will be a hybrid meeting so that we can enable participation from those who are not able to attend in person. Although we would like as many people that we can hold in the premises to attend, we have to be mindful that a lot of people will not be able to attend in person. So we'd like to facilitate that as far as we can. The aim of the co-design workshop is to gather further views on the knowledge support service and to build some common understanding on the key attributes. And this workshop, as Corley's just said, builds on the consultations we've taken to date to listen to parties' views and to listen to those who have a stake in the global knowledge support service, to refine those elements, to seek out the areas for cooperation and collaboration on data, on knowledge and in tools, and how to facilitate and enhance the accessibility of that data and information and knowledge to national and global levels to support decision making. Next slide, please. So what we will focus on what we're planning to focus on at the co-design workshop is looking at the framing of the Global Knowledge Support Service and its intention and its aim, what it will set out to achieve and how it can achieve that. What is the scope of such a service and what are the opportunities to improve digitally the information that we make available? What are the criteria that we should put in place for the information and knowledge that will be made available through the Knowledge Support Service? How will the whole service be governed? What are the options for enabling that service? And what are the linkages that we should make so that the support service is not duplicative and it supports and complements existing initiatives and the decisions that were made at CBD COP15. Next slide, please. And the way that we intend to run this meeting is, as I say, a hybrid meeting. So we will accommodate virtual participation, and we are well practiced with that now. And we will have hopefully regional and gender balance. That's what we will seek to achieve. We would like representation from parties and non-state actors, including those involved in the preparation and delivery of data and those that are using data for decision making. And the way we intend to run this is to work through some shared examples that, will come through our discussions with parties to date on data and knowledge needs to respond to the decisions that were made at CBD COP15 and are required for different levels of reporting through other MEAs. And we work through those examples and look at the information and knowledge that's available, look at the barriers to accessing that information and knowledge, and think about what is required and how the support service can the support service assist with those barriers. And when the co-design workshop is finished, we'll create a report from that workshop and make that available so that others who were not able to attend, or if people want to go away and reflect on what was discussed at the workshop, will still have an opportunity to comment before we finalise the report and put forward a proposal on the scope of the knowledge service. Next slide, please. So after this webinar, we'll make these slides available on the website for the Global Knowledge Support Service. And if you would like to provide any further inputs on any of the elements that you've heard in this webinar today, please write to us at this email address, and please do so by the 5th of April so that we can incorporate those considerations into the discussions that we have at the co-design workshop. Many thanks.
Thank you so much, Natasha. So once again, if there are any questions on the co-design workshop or in any other aspects, there was a question, but I think Anne has answered the question already very quickly. And thank you very much, Amanda, for the support also from SWEP's side. And yes, I agree, the forecasting and the scenarios work will become increasingly important. But this is something that we will need to develop over time, I think. So I don't know if there are any other questions or observations. Let me just have a look at this. Thank you very much, Andreas, for the nice message. Yes, that sounds knowledge partnership for biodiversity. Yes, I think we can do with some creative thinking around a name for the initiative. Thank you very much for that proposal. Natasha, yes.
One of the other questions that came through offline was around the timeline for the work that we're doing. I'm not sure if either of us covered that in our presentations. Just to be clear then, we're running this series of webinars. We'll open up for further comments on what we've heard in these webinars until the 5th of April. We'll have the co-design workshop later in the month of April, and then we will generate a report from that, and a final findings product will be produced in June. So there's adequate time, we hope, for further consultation with parties we're still working with the Secretariat around the CBD Secretariat around when we might start asking questions through a questionnaire directly to parties, but that will be part of that process as we lead up to June. I think that's probably the timeline that we're all looking towards. Yeah, I'm seeing nods from other panelists, thank heavens.
Thank you, Natasha. Yes. So if there are no other questions, maybe, I don't know, Anne or Eri, if you have any final reflections or remarks that you would like to make. And then, Eri, you're starting. Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, no, just to start, I think this is a very good beginning of the conversation about this. I think we need to realize that what we are embarking on is not a 1 year, 2 year process. This is a lifetime. And Biodiversity is going to be here with us, and we need to share information and knowledge all the way. So think about this as just the beginning of a long process and an ongoing and iterative process. So, but the good thing is that we are starting the conversation with many players, and we will invite you to continue sharing this. Even when the service is formally established, the conversation has to continue, because we will need to continue improving and responding to the changing needs of the parties and the different stakeholders. But thank you so much. I think we are starting on the right footing. Thank you.
Thank you, Eri. And
yes, and thank you from my side as well. Thank you to all who took the time, to connect. And I fully support what Eri said. And to me, it's really a kind of collaborative initiative, because we can all learn from each other. And that's really what it is about. So it's just the beginning of a long journey, as Eri said, but I think it's worth it. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Anne. Yes, thank you very much. Well, I'm not arguing that it's going to be not a long process, or that it's not an enormous task, but I think it's a very exciting prospect also, really, to think about a systems change in the way that we collaborate, that we work together, the kinds of sort of sharing and knowledge transfer that we can create. So, a very exciting opportunity to think about how can different parts and organizations really sort of in a more permanent way foster that enhanced cooperation. And I think this is what we are trying to scope, and what we're trying to put down in words and in an initiative going forward. And this is, for me, really an important aspect of that solidarity and that ability to deliver together and jointly, individually, collectively, all of those things on the enormous task that's ahead of us. So, but thank you everyone for participating and for contributing to the conversation. We hope that you will remain engaged in this process. And have a good day, rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Bye-bye.